Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com and follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u and on our Filmmaker YouTube channel. Uh, just hit the subscribe button and check the notification bell to see our weekly videos. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this is made possible by our sponsors, OWC. For more information on how they can assist you in your filmmaking needs, go to owcdigital.com. And this week, I'm joined by Mathew Price, CAS, a production sound mixer whose work includes The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, The Sopranos, and a personal favorite of mine, Living in Oblivion.
Oh,
So welcome to the show, Matthew.
thanks. Hi, I'm glad to be here. Nice to meet you
So
guys.
so I guess, well, because you've been in this game for a while, so
Hmm.
you worked on the Niagara, if I'm not mistaken. Have you used the Niagaras in the past?
Oh yeah, I mean the first 15, easily 15 years of my career was all quarter-inch Niagara recording. Sopranos was almost entirely analog that way till the very last season when I went digital. Still ran my Niagara though,
Oh yeah.
for a while because digital was kind of new and we wanted to. Everyone was nervous about it.
Oh, I'm
But,
sure.
but other than that, yeah, I ran my night street. I still have it in my garage.
Well, I was gonna say I have like odd fond memories of lugging those around because they're so heavy
Well,
and
I've always been basically cart based, although not always. I've done a
yeah.
lot of over the shoulder work. At one point, I had three Nagras.
Oh wow.
One of them, I had the little the IS, which was a little machine, had 5 inch reels, had push buttons on the front,
Yeah.
and ran about 20 minutes a roll, which is great for documentary work because it's
Yeah.
really small. You can control everything from easily reachable in the front panel,
Yeah.
and it ran about 2 mags to 1. Sorry, yeah, 2 mags to 1 roll of sound, so it kind of worked out pretty well, 2 to 1.
Wow.
But now, with all this digital, you don't have to worry about reloading every 20 minutes or 30 minutes.
Yeah.
It
Well, it
brought
kind of
about,
also matched the camera at that point, right? Like it was sort of like
yeah, more or
start and
less. But,
stop.
they would like stop, they'd cut, they'd do camera tests, they do, they film the slate and the color bars and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so it not quite work out exactly,
Yeah.
but close enough. I mean, the trickiest thing about the Nagra, which you don't have to worry about so much now, is that you're watching that tape spinning and the takes are going on, and you're watching it and you're seeing the supply reel getting smaller and smaller, and you'd like, please say cut before I roll out, because the worst thing you wanted to do at
Yeah.
the time was say, I'm sorry, sound rolled out during the
Yeah. Wow. And so was there any challenges in transitioning to digital when you went to, I'm assuming did you go digital like to the DAT tapes or did you go straight to file?
I never really owned I did own a DAT machine, but it was really just for effects work.
Hmm.
When I needed a real like DAT machine, like for documentaries and stuff like that, I would rent it because I didn't think that was going to last. I never believed in the format. It was kind of prosumer. There was a
Yeah.
lot of problems with it. They had technical issues all the time, and I know that I always felt that if you're going to record digital, why are you doing it in a linear fashion?
Yeah.
The whole point of digital is you can random access. You can jump around, from place to place, and that's kind of the freedom of digital. So why would you be tied to a linear tape to
Wow.
do it? And my first digital machine was a Nagra. Sorry, was a Diva 2.
Oh
I've
yeah.
been a Zaxcom guy ever since.
Wow.
So
What are some of the challenges that people might not be aware of for a sound mixer on set that they should be aware of?
oh, so many challenges. We always say, let's say you have 100, 150 crew members on a big job, or at least a medium-sized job, and except for a three-person sound department, for the most part, they're all really directed towards the picture.
Hmm.
I mean, the actors talk, of course, and that's what we record. We record the vocal performance. So I always say that's at least half of what you experience, if not more. Um, but the biggest issues are politics, getting what we need, being a small department who are kind of unique in what we are there to do. And the biggest issue, especially in the New York area, most areas, is dealing with noise issues. Uh, the way they film could really affect uh, how we do our job. Because
Hmm.
it used to be when we used to shoot 35 millimeter film, it was very expensive to shoot and develop and print film. So they would always rehearse and practice and set up the shots, and we shoot one camera at a time often. And it was a much more determined way of filming. But now with
Mhm.
digital, they'll throw up two, sometimes three, sometimes four cameras with all different frame lines, and you want to be able to boom as much as you can. But when,
Mhm.
you have a big wide shot and a tight shot at the same time, unless they needed to be wired with radio mics anyway because of, let's say, noise or other factors, you can get very much have to compromise
Yeah.
the quality of what you get because of the filming style. So a large part of the challenge is really diplomacy,
Mm.
getting what you need, working with all the other departments. I think that the sound department is probably more dependent on other departments than any other department. We depend on the electrics for power, and for working with the lights. We depend on the grips for putting up flags and things to block shadows on walls. Of course, I work with the wardrobe department, maybe closer than anyone,
Mhm.
because we're always putting radio mics on people these days, especially Mrs. Maisel, because it's such a huge show and the style of filming is almost all moving shots. So it's highly choreographed where you have actors coming in and out of rooms and walking down long hallways and they're going away from camera, all the way down hallways talking the whole time and coming back towards camera. So for me, it's a balancing act of radio mics and directional mics, boom mics, shotguns.
Wow. And now, throughout your career, have you had, is there, because you've gotten to see all these amazing performances in person, essentially, is there a performance that stands out for you?
Wow, I have had the absolute privilege of working with so many talented people. It's hard to pick out. Jim Gandolfini was absolutely up there with anyone else I've ever worked with. But I worked with Meg Ryan and Hugh Jackman and that big name. Some of these bigger names. I tend to do more TV than film,
Hmm.
but I did a small movie called The Savages with Laura Linney and Philip Seymour Hoffman as a
Hmm.
brother and sister whose father has dementia. And it was a really powerful, one of my favorite experiences, one of the best films I've worked on. And Laura Linney, Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's hard to pick out. And then on Mrs. Maisel, I can't. It'd be hard to pick anyone above anyone else. Tony Shalhoub is a national treasure. Rachel Brosnahan, who plays Mitch Maisel, it's extraordinary. I've never heard anyone speak so clearly, so fast.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen Mrs. Maisel, but
Oh yeah.
it plays like a screwball comedy where we
Hmm.
do 85-page scripts, and they all wind up on screen in less than an hour. And
Wow.
for your viewers, just if they don't know, we tend to think of it as one script page per minute, on
Mm.
average, of course. So most scripts are about hour-long shows are about 60 pages long, maybe a little
Hmm.
longer here or there. They tend to cut out a lot, but we do these 85-page scripts in 60 minutes of programming, and they hit the ground. We hit the ground running, and we go. So to pick out, I mean, Jim Gandolfini kind of is at the very top of the list, just partly because we lost him, but he was one
Hmm.
of the kindest people I've ever worked with. Also, he was just
Oh
a
wow.
true mensch, good man.
Interesting. Because it's funny because when I talk to editors, one of my favorite things, not on air, but like, is they always talk about, oh, they ad libbed and they did this, but we had to cut it out because it didn't fit the story. Is there a moment like that that you've seen on, like, especially like something like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, where they're doing the comedy bits and what have
Oh,
you?
Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is an exception to the rule. I've never been on a show like that. We actually have we have basically two script supervisors at all times, although
Hmm.
one is called a dialogue supervisor, dialect coach, not quite sure, because we have a script supervisor watching all the continuity, like, cigarette lamps and,
Yeah.
liquids and cups and, where hands go and putting things down. And then we have someone who just watches the script. Every word, every pause, every period, every comma winds up in Mrs. Maisel.
Wow.
There's not a lot of improv on there at all. Alex Borstein, who
Hmm.
plays Susie, the manager, who is funnier
Amazing.
beyond words.
So she's
I mean,
great.
she's the comic heart of the show. When you think of it, you think of Midge Maisel as a comic, but she's actually the straight man. It's really
Mhm.
Susie who's the beating heart of the comedy of the whole show, although everyone's funny. Um, uh, so she will do some stuff, and it doesn't always make the edit.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's tough. It depends on the style. When you're doing a comedy, some of them are very free form where they just want the actors to improv.
Mhm.
You kind of give them a loose idea and then they kind of run with it and they kind of create their own dialogue. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because as I always say, writers are not always actors. I mean, sorry, actors are not always writers. But yeah, there have been scenes we've shot that have never made it into shows. We never shot the scene of the Russian in
Mm.
Sopranos, though, after they find him. That was in the script that never got shot, but it's
Oh,
not like
really?
it got cut out. It got cut out of the scripts. Um, Other than that, I'd have to really think about specific scenes, in context that they cut out. Usually they get cut out for timing.
Mm.
Sometimes I know editors feel like they need to pace it up. I think one issue, what happens, especially on a comedy, is like the writers, especially like Amy Sherman-Palladino and Dan Palladino, her husband, who are the head people on Maisel, when they get into the edit, they hear the same jokes over and over and over again. And it's really funny. I mean, hilarious for an audience, but I think sometimes for them, they always feel, it's like I've heard this too many times. And but Maisel is pretty intact by the time it gets to the air.
So we have a lot of young people who watch these shows, these interviews that we do. For those who are wanting to get into mixing on set, what are some tricks or techniques that you might have learned over your career that you would suggest to them?
Mean in terms of the process of working, or
I
actually
think it,
getting the work in the first place?
well, let's do both. Let's start with the process though of working and in terms of like getting good sound. Like you said, there's a lot of diplomacy, but what are some of the tricks and techniques you've learned in the mixing process?
Well, first of all, I would say there's two ways to get really usable sound. I once heard an older sound mixer once say there's only two kinds of sound, usable and unusable, but I think that's kind of lowering the bar a bit. We get some really, really good sounding tracks. And first of all, remember, you're not recording voices per se. You're really trying to capture a vocal performance.
Hmm.
By saying that, not only elevates what you do, but it elevates the importance of what you do in the eyes of people around you if you refer to it that way. So I really tried to elevate the expectations of what we get. I mean, I've done scenes where there's been a little muddy, or a mic is a little scratchy on a radio mic is a little scratchy. Somebody moves a funny way, and I say, "Well, that was problematic." For sound, I go, "Well, we heard all the words," and I like to think that we're really working at raising the bar from that as a standard of just
Hmm.
hearing the words. There's two ways of getting good sound. I would say is mic placement and control of your environment. If you handle those two pretty well, it'd be hard to mess it up.
Yeah.
Controlled environment means hopefully blocking traffic where you can, or at least holding for trucks if they go by. If you're in an interior space, all kinds of noisemakers, restaurants, for example, are notorious. Refrigerators and
Hmm.
dinging and phones ringing. You got to make sure when you scout a location, if they let you scout, because very often they don't even bring sound on tech scouts anymore, which is appalling. And don't get me started on that. But yeah, I'm about to start a movie. They're doing 3 days of Tech Scout, and they haven't budgeted sound to go on the Tech Scout. And I
Oh.
personally think, while I may not need to see every location, I just think it's a very short-sighted way of dealing with what we need, because we walk into rooms and we need to know what we're going to deal with.
Yeah.
But anyway, when you do see a space like a restaurant, we'll try to get refrigerators off, turn the phones off, things like that. A big issue is loud heels, especially women in high heels on hard floors. We'll try to control that to some extent. Either you put there's like rubber foam you can put on the heels, or the caps, plastic caps, or put down carpets, things like that to control environment. And mic placement is strictly about hopefully getting a really good sounding shotgun microphone in the right place, out of
Hmm.
frame, of course, not throwing shadows. And if you do that and acquire this quietish environment, you won't go wrong.
Yeah.
Radio mics is a big issue for us, especially with multi cameras. Single cameras, they like to do wides and tights. Part of getting good sound is having a working relationship with your director of photography and your director to try to arrange for them not to shoot that way. Do your wide shots first,
Mhm.
or do your tighter shots. Even if you're shooting multiple cameras, save your tighter shots, save your multiple camera stuff for that. And then that helps us out a lot because we can get a mic in closer. Because obviously, if you're shooting wide frame, the mic's got to be up high, and when you cut to the close-up, which they tend to use a lot of, especially in TV, you're compromised by the other frame that we often wind up not ever seeing.
Now,
So, good relationship. But I tell young guys now, I mean, old school people will always tell you, boom is everything, wires stink, never wire unless you absolutely have to. And I always tell people now, embrace the wires, make them work, make them sound good, do it whatever you can to make them sound good, because I guarantee that could be the big difference between capturing a vocal performance and them having to go to the studio later to loop it to ADR, to replace their dialogue in
yeah,
post, which you don't want to have happen
yeah,
if you can avoid it. I mean, some situations are unavoidable. I've heard situations where the sound is perfectly fine, but they want a different performance, maybe a little more emphatic, or maybe not quite as angry, or whatever. And they'll bring actors into the studio later to redo like whole swaths of dialogue, but that's not our
yeah.
responsibility. That's out of our hands.
Well, and like I heard about, I think it was Life of Pi. They were shooting in a water tank, and they had like a highway nearby, and it was just like a nightmare scenario. So it's just capture the audio. We have to create that again in post.
Just to some extent, and you'll have special scenes. Like sometimes you'll have like a romantic scene or a scary scene, whatever, where you know all the sound drops out.
Yeah.
And then but there's still dialogue going. So they need to. It's really about what we call signal to noise ratio. If you can get your level of the voices punchy enough above whatever background noise you have, especially with digital technology like Isotope and Cedar and other devices like that, they can really clean up a lot of production dialogue. And most directors and most actors that I know really hate to loop. On Mrs. Maisel, I was given the command, we don't want to loop anything.
Wow.
So it doesn't always work out that way, but I would say 98% of what you hear on the show is probably production dialogue. Our dialogue editor, speaking of editing, Sarah Stern, who's genius. I've never before Maisel, I've never had a real relationship with the post production sound team like I do with them. Partly because, well, we won a lot of awards, we've done a lot of press, so we've done a lot of like interviews together.
Okay.
So I've gotten to spend time talking with them, and I just sent an email to Sarah just thanking her for her work because she makes me look good.
Well, it's going to be one of my questions is working with post, because it was years ago that I worked a bit in sound, and I remember there was like no conversation between post and set in some situations, and I was wondering.
It's I don't want to say it's the exception rather than the rule, although it probably is. Again, I've been doing this 30 years at least, and this is the closest relationship I ever had. But part of it is often being based in New York. A lot of post production at least used to be on the West Coast. So while I would talk to them, it wasn't like I could just stop into the edit room or I could just go down to the mix stage. Now on Mrs. Maisel, I'll go down to the where Ron Bokar, who's our re-recording mixer, supervising sound editor, they're mixing a scene, or they're even spotting an episode, running through the episode, deciding, well, we need to add a sound effect here, maybe some music here, and I think we might need to loop this line, or I'm going to add a line that we didn't have written. A lot of times they'll add lines later on just to clarify story points or whatever. But I've gone down into the mix stage. I'm always welcome. And so we have a real working relationship. And I think there's nothing more important than that in terms of production. And the fact is that the various guilds, the Academy, and I think CAS, I'm not sure CAS has gone there yet, but the Academy, they're talking about combining the sound mixing and the sound editing awards. No less people. You have 3 persons per, so it'll be 6-person award. But the idea is that the whole sound team is responsible for the ultimate sound of your production, whether it's a film or a TV show. So the mixing and the editing, they feel really shouldn't be separated.
Mm.
Because what are the mixers mixing but what was already edited, and the editors are editing so that the mixers can get the best possible mix as possible.
Yeah.
And my job, of course, is as the front line. I always consider production sound mixer the front line of the sound department, because we're there first and we capture the dialogue, which is usually predominant in terms of importance for most shows. Though obviously special effects, sci-fi, and action and stuff. It's a lot of effects and things like that. But depending on the style and subject matter. So the
Now,
relationships are really important, and Sarah does amazing work as an editor. She'll pull a word or a line from an alternate take that's maybe not the one they chose. She'll clean up S's. She'll take she'll take out noise in between words that's particularly egregious. Before it even gets to the mix stage.
now, in terms of young people getting into sound mixing for set, what would you recommend?
Working in the industry is a commitment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real challenge. I'll say that right up front. The hours are crazy. The work conditions could be tough, especially in the field. We work all nights in single digit, if we're lucky, weather. I know people in other parts of the country have worked in even colder weather. But I remember a night out in Brooklyn, doing 13 hours, an all-nighter in 5-degree weather. That's without the wind. It's hard work. So you have to really want to do it.
Yeah.
Having said that, to get started, I find it's, first of all, very hard to get into the union. We're all at some level. You really need to join the union. It's the only way to get protections.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the protections we used to have, but still better than non-union. I started out doing non-union. I started out by booming for another mixer.
Mm.
I started out as a boom operator on a non-union film, very, very, very low budget. You make no money. You have to be willing to work for almost nothing for a long time. You really have to pay your dues before you can move your way up and get more experience.
Mm.
But I think one thing I tell people is, especially if you're in film school, stay in touch with your fellow students, because a lot of them will go on to become filmmakers. And that's a really good place to get a start in terms of helping them out with their films.
Yeah.
Because most of the time they'll start by doing low budget films, or even as student films, you will get the experience doing sound that way. Another thing, learn the equipment. And camera people, of course, everyone's dependent on understanding the gear that they work with. But sound equipment is really complicated in a lot of ways, especially with digital. There's so many variations, so many variables, so many things that could go wrong that didn't used to happen. I mean, originally I had a boom mic and a 1/4 inch recorder. That was it. I did Sopranos with some basic radio mics, but my first few jobs, it was one mic and a recorder. Now you have, I'm recording on a Diva 16, which is a 10-year-old machine. But we're talking 16 tracks of audio and, digital mixers and digital radio mics, and it's gotten a lot more complex. So understand, know your gear. But to get started, really, you might have to volunteer. I did. I borrowed some sound equipment before I owned my own, and I offered to help people with their short films. A, to get experience, and B, to meet people and establish relationships, because it's all about the relationships. I remember speaking of staying in touch with your fellow students, I know one class of NYU way back when was Spike Lee and the Coen brothers.
Wow.
Lee Orloff, who I kind of consider my mentor. He's an Academy Award winning sound mixer. Speaking of noisy sets, he did Pirates of the Caribbean, all those fans and stuff. That's a whole other story. But he was a film student at the same time as Spike and the Coens, and he wound up mixing Blood Simple. It was his first Coen Brothers film,
Wow.
And because he's, truly an extraordinary class of students with the Coen Brothers and Spike Lee. But the fact is that he was able to kind of kickstart his career and move up the ladder by maintaining his relationships with those people. In terms of getting into paid work, again, there are listings in various places. There are Below the Line has listings of features. The tough part starting out again is finding non-union work. And I honestly, I can't really help so much with that. I've been out of that world for a long time.
Yeah.
I know that in Los Angeles, which I wish we would do in New York, I'm pretty sure in Los Angeles, they now have a, I'm not sure it's called a mentor program or an intern program, where a non-union person can go on and work as an assistant in the sound department on a film set.
Wow.
But in New York, that doesn't exist in the union world.
Yeah.
So it's about dedicating yourself to doing it, learning your craft, of course, and meeting people.
Yeah.
You know, there are listings in New York. The mayor's office, I believe, they have a newsletter. The mayor's office of film, television, and theater. I'm not sure the exact name, but I think they have a newsletter. At least they used to, of upcoming productions that are coming into town. Reach out. I mean, I've had periods, even, well, not in a while, but there were long periods where I would subscribe to an online newsletter, and I would reach out to people, say, hey, I see you got production coming in. Can I send you my resume? You know, I'm very interested. That kind of thing. You know, you have to be incredibly proactive.
Yeah. Now, I have one last question that I ask everyone I've been interviewing. You know, we've been stuck in this pandemic for almost 2 years now. So with that, a lot of people have turned to media as for entertainment to sort of get their minds off things. In the past little while, have you discovered a show or a movie that you think people should check out? I leave the tough questions to the end.
Netflix. I watch all of Netflix. No. Well, you know, I'm sorry, I'm biased, but if you haven't seen The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, it's truly, I mean, I'm lucky to work on a show that I absolutely love, the show itself. And I always recommend that because it's, especially in these dark times, it's just light and funny, brilliantly done, and a feast for the eyes. I mean, production-wise and costume-wise, it's just, you know. My wife likes Acorn TV. She likes British shows. We tend to watch a lot of bloodless British murder mysteries. Well, the most recent show I watched that we really love is Only Murders in the Building on Hulu.
Oh, that's a great one.
With Martin Short and Steve Martin. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that.
I loved Sting in that. I thought Sting was great.
It was great. I thought it was great. What are we watching now? You know, there's so much material out there. How do you? It's almost hard to choose. I spend almost as much time watching trailers trying to pick what I want to watch than actually watching it. I found a British show just recently called Ghosts. Totally goofy, really funny. My wife and I, we tend to lean towards lighter fare these days. You know, I mean, there's a lot of shows I stopped watching because there's certain shows where none of the characters are redeemable that I never get into. And Breaking Bad, never liked it. Never liked Breaking Bad because, like, who do you root for? You know, Billions. I used to love Billions, but it's gotten so dark and everyone is so despicable. It's like I can read the paper for that. You know, so
follow politics for that.
Yeah, exactly. You know, shows like that. Succession too. I know it was funny and dark humor, and I love.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today. And that's it for this week. Be sure to check out filmmakeru.com for our latest courses, and follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I want to thank you again for joining us, Matthew, and of course also our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.